you know, it may be a bit trite, but information is power. And how do we create, by use of information technology, a freer, more open, easier to use way of getting at information which individuals and groups can apply? How do we empower individuals or groups through access to information?
The web is an imperative. The web, or whatever comes after it, is simply non-negotiable. That is the new information environment, and it is an open environment.
One of the problems that we have today is that anybody can be on the system, and anybody can put anything on the system. And the percentage of chaff in the system today is considerably larger than we've ever had in the past.
What strikes me is that the future is going to be a great one for information professionals. The real value of the information professional is not in being able to manipulate computers or make the right keystrokes. It's in knowledge about knowledge and how information is recorded, how it's stored, the best means of access, how to solve problems, how to get answers. And that is an art that is going to be in even greater demand in the future.
The thing to remember about the searching today on the internet is that these search engines are exceptionally crude. It's deceptive because compared with straight ASCII text, a website is a very glitzy operation. It's colorful, there's neat-looking graphics and so on, but when you get to the search engine itself, it lacks many of the features that our tried and true professional systems have.
So I never, ever once had any doubts that this was going to take off. And I really feel very fortunate to have been at the right place at the right time. It's been really a wonderfully gratifying thing for me personally, and I'm sure for the people who have worked and continue to work for Dialog.
Well, there was a major event that happened with the advent of the IBM 360 technology, which we at that time classified as third generation technology. What made that work so well was that it included random access capability instead of tape capability. You could actually multi-program the computer so that a person could interact with the computer. In fact, many people could interact with the computer at the same time. And we had telecommunications, which meant that we could reach anywhere in the world with our computer as opposed to having to be present at the computer at the time. And this was the thing that got quite exciting in terms of information retrieval, because the barriers inherent in second generation technology suddenly disappeared. Well, we inveigled upon Lockheed in their research lab to set up an information sciences laboratory for us to investigate the use of this new interactive processing in various areas. The area I was in charge of was information retrieval. So that was really the beginning of the idea for Dialog.
I probably met Roger the first time somewhere, this is, I'm guessing, around 1960 or so. I first actually had, any contact with him so far as work back in the early 60s, where he was already had the light in his eye for providing, information retrieval on library catalogs and so forth. And I had to set something up for our own department, which was involved in developing all kinds of computer programs for the scientific applications of Dialog. Dialog. Lockheed Missiles in Space, and I heard about his work with the Palo Alto Research Library, and I was able to borrow his, to use his software, which was on a computer, and what we did was to describe various computer programs we had and index them and so forth. So that was the first time I really got to know him. I was not involved with him during that earlier work in the consulting. He was running essentially a research project at that time.
I went to work for Lockheed as a summer hire between my orals and my dissertation, never intending to work for Lockheed for more than that summer. I got an assignment which was to investigate information retrieval technology. And it turned out that was a very interesting assignment, although in those days our computers were what are called second-generation computers. These are computers that have tape in and tape out and batch and no telecommunications or whatever. But I got interested in that problem and continued on with Lockheed while I attempted to write my dissertation, which stretched out actually to a period of 5 years following that summer before I finally completed it, and worked on what was computer simulation but also on information retrieval.
Dialog's earliest customers were initially federal government agencies, but very soon the next group tended to be organizations that were involved somehow with education, not initially schools or school systems or even universities, but such organizations as Project Rise in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, which was set up to provide access to educational materials. They were the next group, but then very soon afterwards, almost simultaneously, some large corporations. I believe that Calspan Corporation in Buffalo, New York was probably the first commercial customer we had, certainly first industrial. They had a very active, eager library. The first university or college of any sort that took on Dialog as a customer was Teachers College at Columbia University in New York. Things started rolling and building from that time.
When I described to Mel Day what we had at the Lockheed Palo Alto Research Laboratory in the form of Dialog, he said, "Look, Roger," he said, "people come in here every day and they tell me they have systems that'll do everything but read your mind in terms of information retrieval. And I can't fund something that doesn't exist. If you show me, that you can do real retrieval on large files interactively, then I'll be able to do some funding." So Mel wasn't going to take a concept or an idea and fund it. He wanted a real prototype working. And that enabled us to get a copy of the NASA file to do the demonstration prototype for him. That was fundamental in getting Dialog going.
I became involved in the information business before we had computers. And most of our operations were manual. We used typewriters. We even used electric typewriters in those days, but that's about it. And we had card sorters, but we didn't have any computers. When I went to NASA, we published an abstract journal, as we did in the Atomic Energy Commission, but we published an abstract journal, and in order to keep up with the flood of material that was coming out in the program, we had to use a computer, otherwise we built huge backlogs, and the cost of the manual processing was just too high. And so those of us who were in the business at that time, and this is in the 1960 period, used a computer to produce journals, and as a byproduct we had a database. The database in those days was used for retrieval purposes, but it was a batch type system, and the only computers that could run it were these huge machines. And there was relatively few places in the country where you could run searches. Some of the large corporations had large computers, large mainframes, and it was just a question of time before organizations set up just to provide that type of service, and that was how Dialog became involved.
And we landed a small contract for about $18,000, as I recall, to demonstrate the technology using the NASA file, which at the time was the largest machine-readable file that there was. It contained about 200,000 citations.
One of the problems we had with a batch-type system is that it was slow, and it was impossible for the person with the question to interact with the database. He would write his question down, he would send it down to the computer room, they would batch the questions. If he had a halfway decent priority, he might get the answer back in a day or a week or 2 weeks. And then when he got the answer back, he would usually have to modify his question, and this was very, very time-consuming. So we decided that that in order that we should have an interactive system, and so that the individual with the question could interact with the database, get an answer back essentially immediately, and then move on from there. And we made a study of the field at that particular point in time. This was in 1960. And we decided that the Dialog team at that time, the Roger Summer team at that particular time, was the best qualified to do the job.
My involvement with the information industry goes back to 1965, when I became responsible for the establishment of the Educational Resources Information Center, or ERIC as it's known. ERIC was one of the first of the national information systems being established at that time, and this was sort of at the dawn of the information era.
I just felt that Dialog was a natural for that database, and made an appointment with Lee Birchinall to discuss developing a system for the U.S. Office of Education. Well, Lee said, we don't want to run computers. You know, we merely want to provide, we want to provide services. And so we'd like to contract with you to provide us a service. Put the database on your computer and we'll access your computer then for the retrieval needs that we have. And it turned out that that then was our very first services contract, and it led to the mode of operation that Dialog took on from then on, which was services as opposed to systems development.
Well, I recall going to California, going out to Palo Alto, not in the nice building you're in today, and Roger was a young engineer in shirt sleeves working at a bench, and he showed me a prototype of the online service that became what the world knows now as Dialog. I'm not sure when that was, probably about 1967 or 1968. But it was from that engineering beginning, laboratory base, that the major system we know as Dialog started.
My first experience with actual interactive searching would have been the mid to late 70s at an engineering firm. I was used to looking things up in nuclear science abstracts, government reports, announcements, and abstracts, and eventually got Dialog training and realized I didn't have to do that anymore. It was miraculous, the ability to add concepts together rather than browse through an index looking for the one relevant reference to pop out was just astounding. I was hooked instantly.
The first customers for Dialog, actually over quite a period of years, were people who were already in the information game, librarians, information service providers, and so forth. They were the ones who understood how information was organized in terms of published information, had produced the material in machine form, largely to run printing presses, but so it made sense to start with them.
When I visualize our customers over time, I think of them in terms of waves, like waves pounding up on the shore. And our first wave of customers was government librarians by virtue of the databases that we offered in those early days. They were government databases. Our second wave of users was that of special librarians as we added science and technology databases. Our third wave was general librarians, librarians in universities and even public libraries, as we added more popular literature and academic literature. The fourth wave that I predicted as early as the early 1980s was going to be the wave of end users, but that wave never seemed to come. I mean, yes, we had end users. We had probably 100 or 200 end users using Dialog, but if we measured their use in terms of revenue, it was just a minuscule percentage of our revenue. So somehow we were striving to unravel the mystery of how you attract end users to a service like Dialog.
There were certainly system enhancements that made a huge difference as we went along. Multi-file searching, duplicate removal, a lot of the features that we as searchers that opinionated little groups like SCOUG had asked for came along, made a huge difference. For me personally, I would say that the overwhelmingly revolutionary and enhancement was the addition of a huge assortment of full-text databases. I think full-text searching really transformed the industry. It was no longer a two-stage process of finding the citation, then looking it up and going all over. You had the information. You had instant gratification right there.
Dialog has been called a supermarket service. I think that is probably fair in that we have databases covering every aspect of most every topic that you might imagine. Why did we do this? Well, we did it because, in my view, information problems are not discipline-oriented. Disciplines were developed to make it convenient for librarians and for teachers to focus courses and shelving of books. But information problems tend to cut across disciplines. If someone is developing a new product, for example, they need to be able to access patents to see if someone else has developed that product. They need to access the environmental literature to see what impact their product might have and what regulations there might be. They need to do a marketing plan, so they need marketing and business data to put a marketing plan together. And I wanted Dialog to be a one-stop shopping.
The biggest problem that we had with librarians is they felt threatened. Online systems threatened librarians initially because they felt that with a batch-type system, you have to come through us. Okay, and so everything will funnel through us, and we will be the expert in the information area. The advantage of the online system is that it enabled the individual scientist or engineer, or whoever else wanted to access the system, essentially to interact on his own basis, because he was the one who knew what he wanted. And although he might be able to frame a question, he didn't know the system. He didn't know how the information was indexed. He really didn't care how the information was indexed. All he wanted was the answer. And librarians always want to provide all the information. Well, sometimes we don't do a person or the requester a favor by giving them all the information. And librarians soon learn that they can become part of a team, and an important part of a team, essentially by being able to give them the information that they need, and the best information that they actually need. It's been a boon to librarians, there's no question, but it's changed the library.
We always had the absolute end user in mind, meaning the teacher, the curriculum developer, the counselor, students, parents, and so on. Although we realized, particularly in the 70s, given the state of the technology, that it was going to be, that they were going to access ERIC through intermediaries, the librarians and the specialists. So we concentrated on that group, and not only through the libraries, but all of these special education information centers that developed around the country.
I had no idea when I got involved with searching what it would grow to be today. I think there was a great pride among those of us who mastered online searching in what we were capable of doing. Of course, we now find ourselves part of something much bigger than we are ourselves, and that would have been completely incomprehensible and unforeseeable when I first got into it. I feel very lucky that that I somehow hooked into something that's become as just phenomenal and world-changing as online today has become.
Well, as Dialog was starting out in the early 1970s, and we were getting our first customers, and we were adding databases, and we were trying to develop a user's manual, and we were trying to attend meetings and expose Dialog to the world, you know, we had our noses very much to the grindstone. I think we were looking more at how we would keep the system operating the next day and how we might do our invoices than we were thinking of what the grand dream might be for information retrieval. But we were somewhat alone in that, because a fellow named Jeff Pemberton decided that this activity has grown to an extent that it would support a magazine, a real magazine for online information retrieval.
The idea for online magazine came after I made a visit to Alan Meckler, who now runs Meckler Media. At that time, he had a small microform magazine, and Roger had asked me to visit him. And after I was done, I was driving back home and thinking of magazines, and all of a sudden it occurred to me that the online business had no magazine. And I'm a journalist, and so I put two and two together, and by the time I got home, I had the idea for online magazine, and I had pretty well figured out the general direction it would take.
When the magazine online was introduced by Jeff, I had a sense that we really had a business here. Somehow a magazine collaces customers and databases and does communications that we can't do solely in marketing and in our own internal publications. So I was very pleased, and we worked with Jeff quite closely in the early days to put the online magazine together.
I think the biggest contribution of online magazine was to function as sort of an extended user group. Also, people have told me that that the presence of the magazine, quote, legitimized the industry, and in the sense that no industry can mature without giving rise to a real magazine. In the beginning, of course, there are newsletters, and then as the field matures, it can support a magazine. And the fact that we had a magazine that had ads in it, and it had a lot of articles and editorials and all the usual things, meant that our business had arrived, and that was quite an important factor.
Our first customers were clearly in the U.S., but not very long afterward, probably around 1974-75, we started actually to get inquiries from potential users overseas. It was very difficult to get access and very costly through the transcontinental phone lines, but I believe that in 1975, Tom Crawford, who was manager of customer services at that time, and I were invited to go to Europe to conduct some training and sales sessions to London and to Paris and to the Netherlands, where there were already some customers, with wonderful support from our database suppliers, and in particular the IEE, the Institute of Electrical and Engineers, right in London, who supported us through providing a room for training sessions and so forth. And we had phenomenal interest almost immediately from Europe, particularly.
We actually had interest expressed from Japan about 1975 and developed an affiliation with two companies there, Kinokuniya and Mariazan, to be our representatives in Japan. So we were offering services in Japan, as I recall, as early as about 1977-78. So clearly we wanted Dialog to be an international resource. In fact, I used to have the model in my own mind that we would like our customers to think of it as being an international service that happened to be housed in Palo Alto, as opposed to a U.S. service that was exporting to the rest of the world.
It's interesting to reflect on why the U.S. got such a head start in this game, but I think there are pretty clear reasons. In part, they go back to the advent of Sputnik, when there was practically a panic in the company that we were very far behind. Also which led also to a concern in education, and as part of this concern and rectifying it, there was clearly a need to provide access to research information or information of any kind that would improve education or various governmental functions.
I think the reason a program like ERIC began in the United States was because we had a broad and deep commitment to technology at the time, and still do. In the early to mid-1960s, there were a number of these national information systems being developed. There was the important program in NASA with its obvious important national mission. The National Library of Medicine was starting its major database, resulting in Medlars and Medline and all of that. Department of Energy, the Department of Defense. There were a number of these going, and it was kind of in the spirit of applying technology to help achieve national goals, and information being critical to research, and research, of course, important to any form of our national defense and advancement that gave rise to these information systems, to the technology. And in the Department of Education, we were able to capitalize on that base that was being established, and I think in some way help contribute to it.
I always get concerned when I hear people talk about revolutions. It isn't a revolution, it's an evolution. Because it keeps going. The most constant thing in this world is change. It's going to keep changing. The speed of the change is increasing. There's just no question. I mean, I think that in this country, we tend to overestimate what we're going to do in 5 years, and we underestimate what we're going to do in 10 years. It always takes longer in the beginning than we think it's going to take, okay? But then it starts picking up speed, and over between that 5 and that 10-year period, the speed becomes phenomenal.
Just the notion that we can communicate freely is liberating, but at the same time, the internet doesn't solve all of the problems. All it is a communication medium, and so just as with any freedom, people have been freed to rise to great heights and to sink to new lows. And one of the lasting benefits of services, professional services such as Dialog, is that you can be sure that the information you're receiving from Dialog is of a high quality and pertinent to the search request that you are pursuing. And that's not necessarily true with the massive information on the internet.
So a question is, how does Dialog become involved with the internet users? Well, I've been absolutely thrilled to see the development of products within Dialog, one being Dialog Web, another being Dialog Select, that offer browsable internet interfaces that are quite sophisticated and very easy to use. I think this is the very first step and the very necessary step to attracting internet users.
In order to make it as information professionals in the 21st century, I think the most important thing is to pay attention, to look at what's going on in the world around us, look at what's happening on the web, in the net, not try to deny some of the changes and hold on to the old ways. Let's preserve what's best of our traditional online services and embrace what new technology can give us.
So here is this opportunity, and I sort of make the point you have to jump in and get in the swim of this information revolution, or you're going to be left behind.
I think that electronic information for school kids is perhaps the most important gift that we can give them. Some critics have said, well, we've had multimedia things before, but those tools were extremely crude compared to what we have today. And online systems, CD-ROM databases are a great equalizer for kids. And I think that'll be true not only in the United States but throughout the world. It will provide not only the raw information itself, but the excitement of finding information, of tracking it down, of sharing it. All of those things are going to have an enormously important role.
Instead of the teacher being the authority and, you know, spouting out all the facts and figures and giving the information in kind of a lecture or resuscitation, the teacher now can become the manager of information resources, and that lecture still has its place, as does demonstrations and small group work and whatever. But now the teacher can be a learner along with the student as they pursue some new problem. And that interjects a whole new level of excitement and perhaps even fun into the learning process.
When I think into the future about the role of the information professional, what strikes me is that the future is going to be a great one for information professionals. The real value of the information professional is not in being able to manipulate computers or make the right keystrokes. It's in knowledge about knowledge and how information is recorded, how it's stored, the best means of access, how to solve problems, how to get answers. And that is an art that is going to be in even greater demand in the future because there are going to be so many other options and alternatives for users. So the information professional who invests in their knowledge about information products, information sources, is going to enhance their value to their organization. And we want to be there with them.